Let's break down every single defense that you must start going into week 8 of the 2024 fantasy football season if you want to dominate your league mate, as well as every single defense we can potentially pick up to stream for the week to help you guys dominate week 8 of the season. And when I say this is the best week for defenses and fantasy football that I've seen all year long, and overall the best week I've seen in years, I seriously mean that this week might break 2024 fantasy football with how good the options are. So do not skip this video. And before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their Week 7 NFL Pick'ems for Monday Night Football are already live, and their Week 8 NFL Pick'ems are going live as well. Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code DCatch a free NFL Pick'em to use towards tonight's games. And don't worry, if you guys watch this video later in the week, you're going to get a free NFL Pick'em for either Thursday Night Football or Sunday's slate of games. And on top of that, Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code DCatch a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So that's a free Pick'em for the week and up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you sign up with promo code DCatch. That link is down below. Let's kick the video off with the Minnesota Vikings, who will travel to face the LA Rams in week 8. And going into week 7, I told you guys, you don't need to bench the Vikings. You don't need to drop a skill position player to pick up an additional defense because you're too scared to play the Vikings against the Lions. We can start the Vikings every single week for the rest of the season. Ride the highs, take the lows, and the lows just aren't really there. 9 fantasy points in week 4 against the Packers. Outside of that, 13 or more fantasy points in every single game on the season. This defensive unit is playing lights out. 3 forced fumbles in week 7, a fumble recovery, a defensive touchdown, and 4 sacks. They allowed 31 total points and put up 14 fantasy points. They sit at 68% rostered. They should be the highest percentage rostered unit in fantasy football. They are that good. 20 sacks on the season, 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 11 interceptions, 2 defensive scores. So far on the year, they've allowed 76 total points. They will travel to face the Rams on Thursday Night Football. I hate Thursday Night Football for defensive teams, but I don't care. Matthew Stafford will get a little bit of a boost with Cooper Kupp returning from his injury finally. But last week, Matthew Stafford, 14 of 23, 154 passing yards, a pick, -2 rushing yards. That was it. Okay. This will look better with Kupp on the field. Don't get me wrong, but so far on the season, Stafford has thrown 3 touchdowns to 4 total interceptions and has 2 lost fumbles. So this offensive line is banged up. They do have a good run game with Kyren Williams. Kupp's coming back, all that stuff. But this is undoubtedly a good matchup against the Rams. And overall, the Vikings, arguably the best defensive unit in all of football. They have to be a start, even on a short week here in week 8. Except we have the Green Bay Packers who are going to travel to face the Jaguars. A good matchup for the Pack this week. And I will admit, I was okay with starting the Packers last week against the Texans because they've been so good on the season. They came back to earth against the Texans in week 7. And this is kind of the problem with the Packers when we really look at what they did through the first 6 weeks. They're allowing a lot of total yardage. They're not very good against the pass. But they get those takeaways. They just didn't have any takeaways in week 7. They actually allowed the fewest total yards of any game on the season so far, with 197 total yards, gave up 22 total points, had 4 sacks, which was their second highest total on the season, but no takeaways. This is the first game on the season where we did not see a forced fumble or interception, and actually in every other game on the season, they have at least 2 takeaways. So they still have a scoring touchdown, 9 interceptions, 6 forced fumbles on the season, and 16 sacks. Are still a very solid overall team that will bring you guys a safe floor. No, it was disappointing this last week, but I think they will bounce back on the road against Trevor Lawrence and company. Now, Lawrence was okay in week 7 against the Patriots, 15 of 20, a passing touchdown, 193 passing yards, no turnovers, where he had 3 turnovers in the previous 4 games. Looked okay against the Patriots, but that Patriots defense is just flat out not good. So I do think this is a nice opportunity for the Packers to bounce back. They sit at 43% rostered. We'll see if they can keep up against that run game with Tank Bigsby, and maybe ETN comes back. But I'm ultimately not worried about the Jaguars. I think that the Packers will bring you guys a safe floor here in Week 8. Next up is the LA Chargers, who are going to be facing the New Orleans Saints at home. And when I say I love this matchup, I love this matchup. Now, I have to record these before Monday Night Football has been played on Sunday night, so I don't know how they look against the Cardinals. I think they have a good chance to have a solid fantasy outing. I also think that there's some potential that the Cardinals can show up offensively at home. But regardless, the Chargers at the time of recording this are 34% rostered, averaging 8 fantasy points per game, and they need to be higher rostered going into the week. They get the Saints this week with Spencer Rattler. Fantastic matchup here, okay? But before we break that down, look at the weeks after this Week 8 matchup. They're going to travel in Week 9 to face the Browns. I like this more when it was presumably Deshaun Watson. Now we get DTR and/or Jameis Winston. I might like that less. And then in Week 10, I also liked it more when it was presumably Will Levis, but now it's Mason Rudolph. Regardless, those are still 2 very strong starts against low-caliber quarterbacks. No offense, Jameis Winston, before they face the Bengals, the Ravens, and the Falcons. So this is a nice little stretch for the Chargers in the next 3 weeks. But here in Week 8, love this matchup against Spencer Rattler and the New Orleans Saints. And Rattler's last 2 games, 2 interceptions and 3 total fumbles. 2 of those fumbles lost. No more than 243 passing yards. So it's a home game for the Chargers. This is a smash spot. If they're out there and available, they are a high upside must-start defense here in Week 8. Next up is the Denver Broncos, who will be facing the Panthers at home. This is the number 1 defense in all of fantasy football. No Pat Surtain in Week 7. No problem against Spencer Rattler, who we just talked about. 22 fantasy points. 6 sacks, only allowed 10 total points, 2 forced fumbles, recovered both of those fumbles, and a defensive scoring touchdown. They have 28 sacks on the year, 5 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 5 picks, 2 defensive scoring touchdowns. They do sit at 71% rostered, but that's still a low enough number that you guys may be able to go out and pick them up. Not everyone wanted to start them this week on a short week without Pat Surtain. If you chose to not do so, you definitely regretted it. They look fantastic as a unit. Pat Surtain could be back in Week 8, should probably be back. And they will face the Carolina Panthers and Andy Dalton. Once again, recommending that you guys could potentially stream the Commanders' defense at home against the Panthers in Week 7. And not all you guys like that. But Andy Dalton threw 2 interceptions. He also was sacked twice. And in Week 6, he threw 2 interceptions. In Week 5, he threw an interception and had 2 fumbles. In Week 4, he threw an interception. So overall, this Panthers offense, while they do have some good pieces like Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Johnson and little sprinkle here and there of Xavier Leggett, they're still struggling offensively. They're on the road here. It's a tough place to travel to there in Denver. This is a great spot for the Denver Broncos. If they're out there and available, they are undoubtedly a must-start defense here in Week 8. All right, next up is the Baltimore Ravens, and this is a defense that I do not trust from a fantasy perspective, but boy, oh boy, do I like them potentially here in Week 8. They will be going up against either DTR or Jameis Winston. Let's go ahead and guess Jameis Winston because I do think that brings more risk. I know you guys out there are going to say, oh, Jameis, he can sling that football, and he can give a hell of a pregame speech as well, and Jameis a good dude, okay? But we have to admit that when there's backup quarterbacks involved, we want to try and stream defenses against backup quarterbacks. Now, the secondary has not played well for the Ravens. They've also faced really good quarterbacks this year. Okay, we take away Week 2 against Gardner Minshew. No offense to my guy Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew actually played pretty well in that game too. I'd argue that was Minshew's best game overall in the season. But week 1, Mahomes. Week 3, Dak Prescott. Week 4, Josh Allen. Week 5, Joe Burrow. Week 6, Jaden Daniels. And in week 7, at the time of recording this, Monday Night Football has not been played, but they get Baker Mayfield, who's been lights out this year. So they have faced very, very good quarterbacks. They've dropped to 62% rostered, and the secondary has not been playing well, but the front 7 has been playing well, and they're very good against the run. So on the road here against Cleveland, they're still averaging 8.3 fantasy points per game. They are certainly going to have some opportunities against either DTR or Jameis Winston, or maybe both. So 19 sacks on the season, 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 3 interceptions. Like I said, they've been struggling, but they also have had some life here and there. 10 fantasy points in week 4, 8 fantasy points in week 2. We'll see what happens, but they might be out there and available. They are certainly worth streaming as we approach week 8. Next up is the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going to travel to face the Raiders. They sit at 35% rostered. This defensive unit is just so dominant, and they might arguably be the best defense in the league, arguably. But they're not a great fantasy defense, okay? And that's one thing that I try to make sure you guys remember. There's a difference between being very good in real life in terms of a defense and a good fantasy defense. We need turnovers. We need score touchdowns, all that stuff. And on the season so far, the Chiefs have 9 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 2 picks, and 1 defensive score. But they're a dominant unit. They're great against the run. And they're going to travel to face the Raiders, who do at times play well against the Chiefs. But Aiden O'Connell, probably a broken thumb, might be able to play in week 8, may not be able to play. Either way, he doesn't scare me. And then Gardner Minshew threw 3 interceptions and had a lost fumble against the Rams in week 7. The Raiders throughout the season have been the best team to stream defenses against. So overall, when we look to last week, I mean, there is nothing to fear when we look at Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew. Jacoby Myers has been banged up. Devontae Adams is gone. The only bright spots on this team have been Brock Bowers as well as Alexander Madison. But this should be a position where the Chiefs can come in and be completely dominant in this matchup. So I do like the Chiefs going into week 8 a lot. They said it is 35% rostered. They're out there and available. They are a great streaming option as we approach the week. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears. And going into week 7 on their bye week, they were the defense 4 in fantasy football. They have double digits in 3 out of their first 6 games. And they sit at 35% rostered. Probably got dropped due to the bye week, or at least potentially did in your league. Now, going to make a quick note. I only like this start if Jaden Daniels is out in week 8. And right now, all signs are pointing to Jaden Daniels being okay. There just wasn't any reason to risk the injury further in week 7. He had the rib injury. I mean, the Commanders were up multiple scores. Panthers had scored 0 points at that point. But he is going to undergo further testing, for the rib injury. So there is potential that he misses week 8. And if that's the case, I mean, Marcus Mariota is probably fine, but I don't know. I know he threw 2 touchdowns, had 34 yards on the ground, 205 passing yards against the Panthers, but there's a big difference between the Panthers defense and the Bears defense, who's averaging 12.1 fantasy points per game on the season. So if Marcus Mariota is the starter in week 8 and Jaden Daniels is out, this is a tough Bears defense. This is a tough team to throw the football against. They're decent against the run overall. This is a good unit. So far on the season, like I said, going into week 7, they're defense 4 overall. They have 18 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, 6 fumble recoveries, 7 interceptions, and have only allowed 101 total points through 6 games. So keep an eye on this one. It's going to depend on Jaden Daniels' health. If he plays, they're probably still maybe potentially decent because they've been a good unit. But I'm not going to start them if Jaden Daniels is the starting quarterback. If he's out in week 8, I think they are definitely a solid play as we approach the week. Next up, we have the Detroit Lions sitting at just 15% rostered. I got a lot of questions going into week 7. Like, what about the Lions? 20 fantasy points in week 6. I'm like, I'm not starting them against the Vikings. They haven't been that good on the season. They sit at 15% rostered, lowly roster, because most people did not risk starting them against the Vikings. Fortunately, just 6 fantasy points this past week. They allowed 23 total points. They had 4 sacks and 1 interception, allowed 383 total yards. So far on the season, they've allowed 89 total points, 15 sacks on the season, 5 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, 7 interceptions. They definitely have lost a big piece of their pass rush with Aiden Hutchinson gone for the season. But really, we just want to look at this one as a pure stream with upside because they are going to face the Tennessee Titans. Now, obviously, we like this matchup more if we have Will Levis as starting quarterback for the Titans, but we don't, and I still think it's okay. Mason Rudolph in week 7, 25 of 40, 215 passing yards, a touchdown, and a pick, but he also fumbled 3 times and had 1 lost fumble. So this is certainly still a good opportunity for the for the Lions at home here. They're very lowly rostered. They're a nice upside play. Coming off of a big win against the Vikings, I think they could come out and have a dominant performance at home against the Titans. So whether it's Will Levis or Mason Rudolph, we're still looking at turnovers for the starting quarterback for the Titans. We're still looking at offensive problems for the Titans. The Lions are a great stream here in week 8. Except we have the Jets, who do sit at 86% roster. They're going to travel to face the Patriots. And once again, I'm recording this while Sunday Night Football is being played, so hard to get a total picture on what the Jets have looked like for this past week, but they've averaged 11 fantasy points on the season leading up to week 7 of the year. They definitely will have some potential against Russell Wilson and company on Sunday Night Football, but they will also have some potential against the New England Patriots in week 8 with a rookie quarterback in Drake May. Now, the last time the Jets and Patriots played in week 3, the Jets had their best fantasy performance of the season with 17 fantasy points. But we had Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, so this is an away game now, and it is a steeper matchup against Drake May, but he's also still a rookie quarterback. Looked much better, and, he still looked good in week 6, but looked better in week 7 in terms of the fact that he had no turnovers. 2 interceptions and a lost fumble in week 6, 0 turnovers against the Jaguars in week 7, but it's the Jaguars. So all I'm saying here is in week 8, lots of potential for the Jets to have another double-digit performance. You look so far on the season, although they're a top 12 defense in fantasy scoring, 11 points in week 2, 17 in week 3. Outside of that, 8 or less fantasy points in every matchup so far, unless they do something big against Pittsburgh here in week 7. So they're a good option. I mean, they're 86% rostered. So if you own them, have a little bit of confidence. They should be a good start. But I still think they're kind of closer to a floor play this week. But overall, a solid start on the road against Drake May. Last but not least, another very highly rostered team, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Once again, I'm recording this with no real knowledge of what has happened in Sunday Night Football. So keep an eye on what they do against the Jets, and maybe that'll determine how confident you are in week 8. But they will face the New York Giants at home. And I know the Giants have been playing okay, but Daniel Jones just kind of came back to earth once again against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 7, 5.9 fantasy points, 14 of 21, 99 passing yards, 20 yards on the ground. No turnovers, but also no touchdowns. We look at what the Eagles were able to do in week 7. They had 16 fantasy points. They only allowed 3 total points, 8 sacks, and a forced fumble, 119 total yards. So the Steelers defense overall in the season has been much, much, much better than the Eagles defense. So the Steelers at home against Daniel Jones and company should be a smash play. If you own them, you don't need to worry. They've been a top 10 fantasy scoring defense all season long. Probably not going to be able to go out and get them off of the waiver wire, but if you own the Steelers, keep the faith. They are a very strong start here in week 8. That'll do it for today's video. There's every must-start defense and stream for week 8 of the season. 10 options, the longest video we've done so far on the year. Just wanted to really break down some of the great streaming options as well as those defenses that you just have to start here in week 8. Don't forget, guys, I am answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever as we approach week 8, drop me a comment. I'll answer every single comment on this video as the week progresses. Don't forget, as the week progresses, we're going to have everything that you guys could possibly need here on the channel. Start sits at every single position, kicker rankings, buy low options, players that are going to go nuclear, sneaky starts, last minute waiver ads, fantasy Q&A live streams, all kinds of content throughout the week. So make sure you guys are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the content. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.